5.7% GDP growth. The U.S. got a straight A on economic performance in the second year of the COVID-19 pandemic. It also became a feat that Biden liked to brag about.
5.7%. The economy grew at a rate of 5.7 last year, the strongest growth rate in 40 years.
However, there's a price behind the splendid number. The biggest driving force behind the growth rate was Biden's fiscal policy. After Biden took office, he proposed a series of stimulus packages, plans to invest in fields like education, infrastructure, and healthcare. For example, the American Rescue Plan, one of its key features is to provide $1,400 stimulus payments to people who make $75,000 or less annually. It also involves tens of billions of dollars in funding to help small and mid-sized businesses. The rescue plan hit $1.9 trillion. A report published by the Brookings Institution estimated that the historic package would lift up real GDP by about 4% and 2% in 2021 and 2022, respectively. The direct physical support improved the spending power of consumers. However, the measure brought many problems. Because of the quantitative easy monetary policy taken by the Federal Reserve, last year the Fed bought bonds worth at least $120 billion per month. The bond buying spree made its balance sheet balloon to $8.7 trillion, double the numbers at the beginning of 2020. It also led the U.S. budget deficit to rise to $2.77 trillion in the 2021 fiscal year, and the national debt topped a historical $30 trillion, an amount equal to nearly 130% of its GDP. Inflation is another product of the stimulus. The U.S. inflation surged to a 40-year high of 7%, which means rising costs for everything from food to housing to fuel and electricity. Take food for example. Cooking at home is now 10% more expensive than it did a year ago. It's more difficult for consumers to save money by eating out less. In comparison, the cost of takeout and restaurant meals climbed 6.9% year on year. And because of low-income households spend a higher percentage of their income on necessities, they are the ones who are most impacted by the inflation. Meanwhile, wages have lost buying power under the severe inflation. Unless your wage or salary grew much higher than the national average of 4.5% last year, inflation likely canceled it out. Small business owners find it more difficult to survive under these circumstances. According to a survey of over 1,100 small business owners, 73% said rising energy costs are having a negative impact on their bottom lines, and some have to pass the cost on to consumers. The money availability and relaxed epidemic control stimulated domestic consumption. However, American consumers rely on imports. The problems of continuous shipping delays and shortage of labor have pulled America into a historic crisis of supply chain. All those made inflation even worse.
Inflation is much too high, and we understand the hardship it is causing, and we're moving expeditiously to bring it back down.
Because of inflation, on March 16th, the Fed raised the benchmark interest rate by 25 basis points, for the first time since 2018. On May 5th, it again raised the rates by 50 basis points and pushed the federal funds rate to a range of 0.75% to 1%. Goldman Sachs predicted that the Fed would raise rates 5 times this year. Besides, the Fed is also preparing to reduce its balance sheet from the coming June. The measures are actually shutting down the major engines of U.S. economic activity. Data shows that real disposable personal income has declined. So does consumer sentiment. Global financial markets also became unstable because of the rate hikes. According to a Bloomberg index, global stocks have lost more than $22 trillion in value since the Fed began signaling a tougher anti-inflation stance late last year. Tightening its monetary policy also strains the global debt market. In particular, emerging economies could be affected by the dollar-denominated debt. Once the currency devalues, the burden of their debt will increase significantly. Countries that have high dollar-denominated debt but lower reserves, like Argentina and India, could face debt risks. After the stimulus policy is canceled and the fund expires, it's hard to say if the U.S. economy could find a new impetus under the uncertainty of the epidemic. Also, the lying flat anti-epidemic measures have taken over 1 million American lives.
1 million empty chairs around the family dinner table, each irreplaceable.
The numbers are still climbing. It will give more uncertainty to the future of the U.S. economy.